This is probably one of the most quietest groups I have ever seen come on Zoom.
Just because I'm on mute.
I figured you'd be speaking in, Bill.
I just spent 2 hours with auditors, so I'm starting the day off on the right foot, I guess.
I guess we're lucky you're not standing on a ledge somewhere. Is that what you're saying?
Well, you love budget cycles.
No.
Everybody hear me okay? All right.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, well, I'm Mark Bennett, Chair of the Criminal Justice Reform Commission. It's 12:02. Took me a second to get logged in here. I apologize. We are in the, this is the subcommittee for the race in the criminal justice system. That's a subcommittee of the Criminal Justice Reform Commission for the state of Kansas. And Jordan, I think you're on, is that correct?
Yes, I'm here.
If you would, I know it's, since this is not a, remind me this, since this is not a, the subcommittees don't have final voting power, but they do have the power to vote to send recommendations to the overall commission. Are we still doing the Cora preparatory remarks to begin these?
I believe they've been reading those for most of the, or all the subcommittees so far.
I think that makes sense. So if you have that, would you mind reading that into the record? And then the next thing we'll do is go through a roll call. I believe Jordan's got a list. We should have a list of the commission members who were on the first call. We'll do that roll call and people can identify themselves for anyone who's listening. And then the second thing we'll do is do a roll call of the subcommittee members who have been invited to be a part of this subcommittee so we can figure out who all is on the call. Jordan, if you would, with the preparatory remarks.
Due to health and safety concerns, members of the public are not in attendance at this meeting, but full access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication, allowing members of the public without cost to listen to the meeting through the use of live stream audio broadcasting on the internet. Information on how to access this meeting was sent out with the notice for this meeting. The agenda for this meeting was included with the notice of the meeting. It may be requested from the Kansas Legislative Research Department using our website, KLRD. Sorry, I don't have that listed here. ksledgeresearch.org.
Okay.
And then let me, sorry, this is the first time doing one of these. For me, each member of the subcommittee and staff will state their name and title each time the individual begins speaking or voting so that the individual can be readily identified by remote listeners. All participants are required to ensure that microphones, phones, or other electronic devices are muted when the participants are not speaking so that the ability of remote listeners or observers to hear the proceedings is not unnecessarily impeded. Public comment will not be allowed at this meeting. During the subcommittee meeting, the committee will not recess to a closed or executive meeting pursuant to KSA 754319 and amendments thereto. Each motion, if any, will be clearly stated before the committee votes, and the chairperson will announce the results of the final vote.
Okay. I think the next thing we should do then is go through a roll call. We'll start with the commission members. This, you have that list, Jordan?
Sure, just one second here. Okay, these are the names I have on this list, and it may be incomplete, but this is what I have so far. So I have Chairperson Mark Bennett,
Present?
Chief Ackerman,
Present.
Representative Finney.
Present.
Thanks,
Present.
Representative. Professor Francis,
Present.
Senator Haley, Tabitha Owen, Representative, oh, I see Tabitha's on the call here.
Yeah, can you not hear me?
I couldn't, but I might have talked over you.
Okay.
So sorry about that. Representative Owens,
Present.
Professor Phillips,
Present.
and Pastor Robertson. Okay, and then I'll also go ahead and note who I can see on the call. Looks like we've got Pastor Gates, Chief Hooper, Shannon Portillo, Melody Brannon, Jessica Glendening, Judge Rios. And then I see a phone number here. I'm not sure who that is, but I'll let them tell us who they are.
Sheriff Carr is present.
Thanks, Sheriff.
Jordan, this is Sylvia Penner. I'm present as well for the commission.
Thanks, Sylvia. I see one other person participating by phone. If they could identify themselves.
What's the last 4 digits that?
I see 103 is the last 3.
I believe that was, it came up as a speaker when Tabitha Owen was speaking.
Oh, okay.
So she maybe have dialed in.
No, I'm here. That is weird because I connected via computer audio, so I'm not sure why it's not me.
Okay.
And then I also see Greg Halls from CSG Justice Center.
All right.
And then one other person is joining here. It looks like Mark McCormick will be joining us as well.
Okay. Very good. Just to make sure, we also got a few other folks here that I know were in. I hope got invited. I believe they did. The other list would have been Jessica Glendening. That was she was on, you said. Secretary Zamuda or Margie Phelps, are there either of them on the call or a representative? Not hearing any. Alicia Sanchez from WSU. I'm not sure. Didn't hear her name. I hear her.
Mark.
Yes.
Mark, this is Sylvia Penner.
Yeah.
I did have a conversation with her, and Ms. Sanchez definitely wants to participate. So perhaps she had a conflict today.
Okay, very good. Just make sure if she was on, I want to make sure we accounted for her. I know just Judge Green from Court of Appeals was not going to be able to be on this call. He had a conflict, but I know he wants to be part of this. Larry Burks from the NAACP. Larry, are you on? Guess not, but I know Larry, he may join later. I know he was going to try to do that. And then I've got Claudia Amarco from Kansas Appleseed. Okay. Well, those are the folks at least who either have been or should have been invited, and we'll follow up as we go along.
Mr. Chairman.
All right. Yes.
Hey, this is Sheriff Carr.
Yes.
Also, KSA President, Sheriff Cole Presley, I believe was to be invited onto this. I don't know if it made it out to him or not.
Don't know, but I'll find out, and if not, we'll get that to him. Okay. So in terms of agenda, I think we've gone through all the roll call. We've got identified for listeners and also just for all of us on the call who's present. I wanted to go through here on the agenda and explain a little bit of what's brought us to this point, and then open it up for some more discussion. But so for all the listeners on the call, the Kansas Criminal Justice Reform Commission was something that was recommended during the 2019 Kansas legislative session. The legislature passed a bill that brought life to this commission, and members from across the state were picked by their representative agencies. So I'm the representative from the DA's Association. We've got representatives of various entities on the commission. The commission met in summer of 2019. I was voted to be the chair of the commission. And in that I believe the first time we met, we talked about plans and goals, and there were certain things set forth in the legislation that we were supposed to accomplish. And the thing we came up with was the idea that certain subcommittees should be stood up to address these issues. And the subcommittees that we have, just for everyone's edification, we had a data management subcommittee. The idea was, let's see what sort of records management systems are available across the state so that we could more efficiently have, is there some way to increase efficiencies with respect to the way that all the various agencies work together? We have a substance abuse and mental health subcommittee. Representative Owens is the chair of that committee. By the way, Jennifer Basinger, a citizen in Sedgwick County, she's the chair of the RMS, or the Data Management Subcommittee. We have a subcommittee on reentry. It was initially Representative Finney. She's also sort of handed the reins off to Professor Phillips, and we've had updates from that subcommittee. We've got a guidelines proportionality subcommittee that Chief Ackerman, chief of the Marysville Police Department, he's on the call. He's the chair of that subcommittee. And I think that's it. Maybe I've overlooked something. And then let's see, so this is August, I want to say May, early June, Professor Francis and Professor Phillips reached out to me. And obviously at that time, and it remains the case today, but certainly at that time, the protests and the public discourse on race brought about or brought to the fore by the George Floyd protests around the country. The question was posed, is it, while each of these subcommittees touch very much on issues that are going to impact or address race in the criminal justice system, is it appropriate to have a standalone committee whose goal is simply to raise those issues and to discuss those issues? And the consensus was yes. I think it'd be tone deaf not to. So we met in June 30th. I asked everybody to come up with ideas for people who would be our ideal team to be on this group. That was done in that meeting. And since that time, people have reached out, and that's how we've got to today's meeting. So I wanted to spend a minute, just several minutes going through that background before I move on. Professor Phillips, Professor Francis, or any other members of the commission have anything to add to that background? Okay, seeing no voice. So the next thing I was going to say is, so what's the next step here? The backdrop of the commission, the larger commission, is that we were charged with identifying issues in a interim report that was due this past December 1st of 19. And that was done after several hurried months through the fall. And we put together what we kind of came to review or call the low-hanging fruit, certain bills that we thought we could get passed that would get us off on the right foot. Largely got to some consensus on those things. And I would say the consensus of the legislature once those bills arrived was that they were well received. And just for instance, there was a diversion bill that passed 125 to nothing in the House and was set for what I understood to be a warm reception in the Senate when COVID shut everything down. So nothing got passed, but it was not a reflection of disinterest on the part of the legislature. It was simply the COVID, derailed everything. But the next step then for this commission, and that's what each of the subcommittees is working on, is we owe a final report to this legislature this coming December. which if you're obviously looking at your clocks, it's August 13th. That doesn't give us a lot of time. I will tell you all, though, that before you worry that this is maybe a wasted effort, the commission is, I think, united in our anticipation that we are going to ask for an extension of a year. COVID just did not give us a chance to line things up the way we wanted to and derailed our plans. And we also recognize, I think, that the revenue impact that COVID is going to probably have on the legislature's ability to do some of the things we want them to do is also going to be impactful and may make it difficult. And so we're going to ask for another year extension for the commission. Doesn't mean it'll happen, but I think we all realize that right now it may not be we think it's probably going to be a well-received, is the best information we have at this point. That's going to be a well-received request. So, well, I can't guarantee you that your agreement to be a part of this subcommittee is going to be anything that's going to last more than about 90 more days. My expectation is that it will, and that it is worth your time to be involved in this. So that's the big picture backdrop. The goal at this point is, today, what I'd like to accomplish is, now that we've explained the general goals, wanted to make sure everybody knew what you were walking in, the new members who've been invited. Make sure this is something you want to be a part of, and talk about discussion for issues, about what this might do. I think the members of this subcommittee are going to be free to do, run this subcommittee how they will. I think it's standard that someone is named chair. If someone wants to volunteer for that or take nominations from the floor, we can do that. But the goal would be that we set up maybe a working group or two. With as limited time as a window of time as we have, that may be unnecessary. I don't know. We'll open that for discussion. But the idea would be, if there are certain things that you think need to be addressed, this subcommittee will be given a voice, and that voice will be heard in the final report issued December 1st by the commission. That will go to the legislature. It will be a part of the public record. And so, at the very least, if nothing else, if the subcommittee simply says we're going to identify issues that need to be addressed, even if it's not as specific as change this law or that law, even if there's not time for that, okay. But these are issues we want to address. These are issues we want to be a part of the public discourse. And then if the legislature extends us for a year, then you'll have a whole year to get into to those kind of details. Maybe on the flip side, you have there's something that can be identified here in the next few weeks and a couple of months, and you could get granular, you could get very specific. I'm not saying that's not a possibility, but that's the situation we find ourselves in. So I've talked enough, 15 minutes here, but this was my one chance to get in front of everybody, tell you what I think brought us to today's date. Make sure you know what you're signing up for. Make sure you understand what the expectations are. And again, anybody who's a member of the commission, Representative Owens, Representative Finney, Professor Phillips, Professor Francis, Sylvia, any of folks who've been with us on this until this point, anyone want to add to what I've said, clarify, add any of their thoughts before we turn to the next step, which is, I want to confirm that the folks who joined today for the first time, that now hearing all this, you do want to be a part of this. Not too late to run away. And then let's open it up for discussion regarding other issues and how people feel like they should move forward. And last thing I'll say before I open it up for discussion is, I'm calling this hearing and acting as the spokesperson right now simply to get this off the ground, but I have no ownership interest in this subcommittee. If someone else wants to be the chair, great. I'm happy to do it to keep us moving. But if we want to have a new formal chair of the subcommittee, that would be fine too. So anyone want to comment at this point?
I would, Chairman Bennett, this is Representative Owens.
Yes, sir.
I did want to fill you in. I spoke with Representative Willie Dove, and he would like to be part of this subcommittee as well. So if you could chime him in on that. I spoke with him earlier today.
I'll have Jordan send a invite to him to the next meeting of this subcommittee.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Anything else on that? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, this is John Francis.
Yes,
I have communicated with Chairman Rupnick at Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. He was trying to get a consensus among the tribal chairpersons of the 4 tribal nations from Northeast Kansas to get a representative from Native American community in this subcommittee too. And so I'm waiting to hear back from him.
Very good. Anything else, Professor Francis, in terms of background or generalized discussion?
No, thank you.
Anyone else want to be heard?
Chairman Bennett, this is Sheriff Carr.
Yes, sir.
I have reached out to KSA President Cole Presley. He would like to have the opportunity to sit on this commission on behalf of the Kansas Sheriff's Association.
Okay.
As you're aware, I'm unlike you tied up in several other subcommittees.
Okay. We can do that.
Jordan does have contact info.
This is Representative Finney.
Yes.
I would like to add someone later. I didn't know we had the opportunity to extend an invitation, so I would like to, at least by the next meeting, be able to recommend someone, because I would love to see it a little more diverse. I would love to see someone from an additional person of color on this committee if possible.
Fine. And at some point we can get too many cooks in the kitchen, I suppose, but I'd rather have more people invited and see what we can do. And especially if this goes off on another year, then we can break into working groups, and then all those more people involved will help, I think, in working groups. If we don't get an extension, then so be it. But
okay, thank you.
yes, ma'am. Anyone else want? Yeah.
Chairman Bennett, this is Jean Phillips. So one of the, when we were first brainstorming this, we thought it would be good to have someone from community corrections or probation. That was my job, was to reach out and to find some folks. And we had a recommendation from Shelley Williams for a person named Keith Clark, who is a color who works in Johnson County and has for a very long time. And then I noticed that you mentioned about Secretary Zamuda or Margie Phelps. I don't think either one of those were thinking about being on the subcommittee, but they had provided some folks for us to evaluate, consider. There was a person from Juvenile Services, a person from Parole in Olathe, and a Community Corrections person from Shawnee County. I don't know how we want to choose between folks. I do know that Keith Clark, which was the recommendation from Shelley Williams, actually sent in an application or a request, and I think I forwarded that on to you. He would provide diversity. I actually don't know about the other individuals, so I can't say that they also wouldn't provide diversity. I just don't know how the committee wishes to evaluate who from the community corrections, set of folks we would like to invite.
Yeah, I appreciate you reminding me of that. I apologize. I'd forgotten about that email you sent me Monday, I believe. So we can, when we switch gears here in just a second to discussion about how we set up this subcommittee, I'll bring up folks' names, and maybe others on the call know these folks better and could weigh in. So I thank you. I forgot about that. Okay. Anyone else from the commission side of things who wants to add anything that was said or make sure that I didn't miss something? Okay. With respect to the folks who are on the call now for the first time, who've been invited to be members of this subcommittee, do any of you have questions or comments? And I guess I won't construe your silence against you, but if this isn't really what you signed up for, let me know. If it is something you're interested in, we don't have to go through every one of you, but I just want to open it up for commentary from all the people who were invited today. Dion Gates, Professor Gates, Melanie Brannon, Judge Rios, Shannon Portillo, Mark McCormick, etc. Okay. Well,
Mark?
Yeah, there you go. Yes, sir.
Hey, this is Mark McCormick from the ACLU.
Yes, sir.
Could you give me a sense, and if you've been over this already, I'll take the Reader's Digest version.
Sure.
But can you give me a sense for what you want to accomplish through this subcommittee? What questions you're trying to answer?
I'll say to Professor Phillips, Professor Francis, and others weigh in at any point if I'm less than complete. But I think the goal here is the commission itself has been as broken down as I don't know if you were on yet, but the guidelines under Kansas law, proportionality, are they proportional? We're talking about reentry programs and making sure that legislation is in place to effectively do those sorts of things. And we're touching all sorts of things that are, I think, race in the criminal justice system is probably baked into all of those things. But there was not a standalone commission, and that's probably an oversight on our part for not being, thinking ahead last summer when we first got this thing started. And so the thought was we need to make sure we've created an opportunity for explicit conversations about race in the system, not just improvements to the overall system that will through collaterally benefit people of color who interact with the system. And so this subcommittee, the idea is it's very open-ended, but we've got until December 1st to put a report together to the legislature. And as I said a minute ago, that's when this commission is supposed to end. Now, we don't think, because of COVID, that we think that those of us on the commission, I mean, none of us want more meetings and another year's worth of meetings, but we all recognize another year is probably appropriate. So we're going to ask for that, and we hope we get it. And if that happens, then this subcommittee and every subcommittee is going to live another year and have that much more of an opportunity to get things done. But at the very least, plan step one is, can we at least identify issues that we believe that the people on this subcommittee believe should be at the forefront of any discussion about criminal justice reform vis-a-vis race specifically? So are there topics that would just simply be an incomplete discussion if we didn't talk about this or that? And so it's really an open forum to give all you members of this subcommittee the chance to go. We can't have a fully robust conversation about criminal justice reform in Kansas unless we have talked about this or that, these issues that are going to come out of here. I recognize that given the short turnaround, needing a report by December, it may be difficult for you to say, okay, give me specific statutes you want to tweak subsection B versus C. You want to, that may be, I don't know, maybe you can do it, maybe you can't, but just identifying and making sure that there are things that are put into that public record, because this report, I mean, the last one was 100 pages and it went to the legislature, and it set the tone then for legislative change that was to have taken place this last year, and it was very well received and caused a lot of discussion in the legislature. Representative Finney, Representative Owens are on the call. They could speak to that, I think. And I have every reason to believe that our final report will be equally well received. So anything we put into it is going to be given an audience and a voice, I think, that far exceeds certainly this subcommittee. So I'm talking in sweeping tones here, but I'm trying to say those are the big picture issues. If we have time, if there's something specific, great. But at the very least, in a meeting or two, it seems to me that the people on this call are well positioned to say, we better talk about indigent defense services and the fact that if we're going to have, you can't talk about criminal justice reform if we don't talk about making sure people of color are well represented, and we have, and talk about the public defenders and that, I mean, that could be an issue, for instance. And you could, even if you don't get as granular as here's the statute that needs changed, that's a topic that this subcommittee is going to be in a position to shine a light on. So I just pulled one out of the sky, but that's an example. Does that address your questions? Okay.
I got you. Thank you for that, Mark.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Hi, Mark. This is Melody Brannon.
Yes.
First, I'm very grateful to be on this because I do think public defense is an important aspect of this. I just wanted to point out, I'm happy to see Dr. Portillo on here as well. And because she's a co-chair of the Governor's Racial Justice, Equity and Justice Commission, I think it's really important whatever we're doing here that we coordinate with that commission as well, so that we're not duplicating efforts. And so I think the two groups together can have a lot of force if we are coordinating and at least cognizant of what the other's doing. So I'm happy to see Dr. Portillo on here.
I'm glad you brought that up. The question that was raised is this going to be redundant to the governor's task force team? And we reached out to the governor and she said, no, keep doing what you're doing. We think that commission or that working group task force is going to be more global, not specifically just criminal justice. And so there's an opportunity for the two to, if not work hand in glove, at least not work at cross purposes to each other. So I'm glad you brought that up. I heard another voice. I'm sorry. Someone else?
This is Shannon Portillo. I just wanted to say thank you, Melody, for pointing that out. And also note that Mark McCormick is also on the Governor's Commission on Racial Equity and Justice. And so I do hope that we can kind of think through how we can work in parallel and complement each other's work between the subcommittee and the commission. I think, as Mark has been pointing out, that this raises a lot of issues. Having both commissions kind of bring these issues to the forefront will be really important so we can get some good work done after our reports are in December. Thank you.
Very good.
Mr. Chair, this is John Francis.
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to address Mark McCormick's question about our goals. And I think, at least the way I'm seeing this, and I'm really just speaking for myself, part of what I see us doing now is figuring out what those goals are. I don't think we came in necessarily with a clear set of goals, but rather we want to expand the conversation and develop goals. And it may be that this group is a bridge to a recommendation that the state legislature create a separate commission on to investigate and address racial inequality in the criminal justice system. As Chairman Bennett said, the work we've been doing so far has been very deep. It's been very focused on particular aspects of the criminal justice system, how to address overcrowding in the prison population, how to improve results when people re-enter society after being either in jail or prison or under community supervision, how to be proportional in sentencing. And so those had that particular lens with it. I think events from this spring made crystal clear, and continuing events, that we need to look at criminal justice through also the lens of how does criminal justice and race overlap. And I think we need to specifically look at that. As Chairman Bennett said, the work we've done overlaps into that, but I don't think it had that devoted lens to it. And so I think, looking at issues like policing and sub-issues, police training, qualified immunity, statistics on stops, I think looking very specifically at issues like that and opening up the conversation. So I see, and again, I'm speaking for myself, but I see the role of this group as creating a slate of issues to take a deeper dive into. And it may overlap some of the work that we've done. It may overlap the Governor's Commission. But I think to the extent that we can work collaboratively within this context will be beneficial.
Okay.
John, this is Mark McCormick again. I'm sorry. I was just going to thank you for speaking to that point. Thank you, John.
I heard another voice.
Yeah, Chairman Bennett, this is Sylvia Penner.
Yes.
I'm with you that we want to be careful not to have too many cooks in the kitchen, but I do want to just maybe see where we are geographically. I think we have done a very good job at trying to work at obtaining a subcommittee that is diverse in race, in gender, in industry, but I just am curious to know whether we are also geographically diverse. Do we have representatives from the 4 quadrants of the state? Because even though some of the issues are certainly going to overlap, some of the problems that need to be addressed in, for example, Southwest Kansas are going to be a little bit different than what they are in Northeast Kansas. The resources that are going to be available will be different. And I see, just from the folks that I do know, we have a heavy presence for the South Central part of the state, the Northeast part of the state, but I'm not sure we have a lot for the Western, Northern, and Southern parts of the state.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of folks from Western Kansas, but Northwest Kansas and Southeast Kansas are not very well represented on the commission or on the subcommittee. But so to the extent that anybody has, names or suggestions, I agree. I mean, let's put it this way, I'd rather have a robust discussion where all the points of view are considered, even if it takes a little longer. And so that's a good point.
Mr. Bennett, this is Representative Finney. Gail Finney speaking. I'd kind of like to caution the group that we want to make sure that we don't get overloaded. And I think we should be much more specific on what we're trying to do. I mean, because those issues that we've mentioned, qualified immunity, mass incarceration, police harassment. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And with the legislature, I think if we don't narrow it, I'm talking about like 2 or 3 top items, I think it's going to be very difficult to accomplish these things in the legislature. And when we really don't have enough defined time where we can really elaborately go into all of these issues. So that would be my recommendation, is that we really narrow our goals and our focus to really actually accomplish something.
Very good. Thank you, Representative Finney. Tabitha Owens, I saw you were talking.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to what Sylvia said, and I think that that's a really good point, and that's one of the main reasons that I wanted to join this subcommittee, specifically because I know that in rural Kansas, the population is different, and maybe we have certain areas with less people of color, but that doesn't mean that that people here shouldn't be educated and that we shouldn't understand what people of color across the state and across the nation even are dealing with. And so I do think that Sylvia's right, that it is important for there to be people on the commission who are living in different parts of the state. And so that's kind of why I'm here. And I hope that I'd be glad to see if there are other people that I can find that would be a value add to the commission as well.
Okay.
Mr.
Go ahead.
This is Sheriff Carr. May I ask for permission for Jordan Milholland to add Cole Presley to this call, to send him the link?
Sure.
Thank you.
I don't want to cut anybody off here, but let's get back to what Representative Finney said a moment ago, in terms of given the time limitations, given also just the reality that let's talk about what the Kansas legislature is going to be faced with in January. And that assumes things get better between now and then, and there's no, and that is certainly an unknown. What's going to happen COVID-wise and economically and health-wise for the state between now and January. But even assuming things get no worse, the legislature is still going to be coming back from a session where they got just a handful of bills passed last year. All the stuff that was on the agenda last year had to be essentially bumped. So we're going to be fighting for attention right off the bat. Even though criminal justice reform is very much in the minds of citizens, and it's a big topic, it's a big issue, an important issue. There are going to be a lot of important issues. Revenue, how they're going to pay for schools, and healthcare is going to be an issue. So Representative Finney's point that the more specific we can be, the better. Now, we could talk about big topic issues that we just want to be included in the report to say at some point we need to address X, Y, 1 through 10, top 10. But if there are specific issues we want to try to address, I think she's giving good counsel there. So let me open it up in this respect. Everybody on the call is not only willing, it sounds like, to be on, but we're even brainstorming who else we might add to it. Everybody has several examples of kind of what the overarching goals are. Let's take, I guess my recommendation at this point is let's take Representative Finney's advice, and let's turn the attention a little bit here to, do people have ideas of topics that they think, we're not going to resolve them today, but topics they think we have a top 10 list, a top 5 list of things we really think we need to address. I'll give you quick examples. There's a couple of reports that are very much in discussion nationally in these types of conversations. The 8 can't wait talking points. Most of you, I think, are aware of that. I mean, this is get as specific as banning on chokeholds and strangleholds, de-escalation training, warnings before shooting. This is very much a police-specific thing, as opposed to bigger picture criminal justice. We've also got the reforming policing in America report that came out of DOJ in 2020, or 2020 report, I think it came out the year before. Again, very much specific to policing, and I'm not sure that that's, this subcommittee can be much broader than policing specifically. But are there certain things that members of this committee think, just, I don't know, brainstorming here, what do you think needs to be addressed either generally, starting general, and then we can work our way to specifics.
I have a suggestion.
Yes, go and state your name for the listeners.
This is Jessica Glendenning. I'm in the Shawnee County Public Defender's Office. One of the things that I think is historically a problem when trying to address some of these issues is that we don't have good data. And there's not good records about policing. So we don't know, for example, how many people of color are stopped but not arrested. We hear anecdotally as public defenders stories from clients and family members of clients saying, you know, I got pulled over 4 times in one day, but that person had nothing illegal on them. So there's no criminal case and there's generally no record of those stops. And I think it would be incredibly beneficial to gather some data, because otherwise we have, you know, people saying the police are being racist and they're stopping me, and the police are saying, no, that's not what's happening. And we have stories from both sides, but no way to verify what is actually happening on the ground. And if we really want to address these issues, we need some way to, I guess, track contacts that don't evolve into an arrest, and get some data on who is actually having police interactions within the various communities, so that we can determine whether, you know, whether there's a problem, where there are problems, and then figure out what steps need to be taken to address that. But without any data, we're kind of in the dark as to what's actually going on.
So maybe the point of if I'm hearing this is not so much trying to gather data in the next 30 days, but in terms of a legislative proposal, a data gathering piece of legislation, so that more informed conversations can take place in the longer term.
Correct.
Anyone else want to speak to that specific suggestion?
This is Shannon Portillo. I really like that idea of data gathering. I think we need to also recognize that this would be going through the numerous police departments that we have throughout the state. And so providing funding for how we would go about collecting that data. So that would be a legislative ask. And then making sure that that's in some way tied to other pieces of information. So how do we make sure that individual departments are actually reporting data, so having some sort of mechanism to ensure data reporting?
Sure. I'll tell you that Ms. Basinger's subcommittee, the data management subcommittee, one of their, I'm not sure that it was said quite the way either of you have said it, but this was, again, kind of baked in, was the notion that data is, information is power. I mean, we can better address issues, good, bad, and otherwise, from cops, from citizens, from whomever, if we have the data. And the first threshold question was, well, what records management systems do each of the 400 law enforcement agencies in the state have? What records management systems does DCF have? Does the cop who shows up tonight know that DCF was at the house 2 times this last week? And the answer is no. I mean, that's pretty clear. And then it goes, you can even extend it to other situations, parole, probation, etc. And the roadblock they found was it's very difficult to find that information. So a post audit from the legislature was, I think, contemplated, and Representative Owens or Representative Finney may have a better memory of that than me, but I believe that some effort is being made to at least figure out what management systems are out there, because I think that's one of the threshold questions is, if you're in a very, there are very small agencies, some of whom their only data management is an Excel spreadsheet, and that seems weird. That can be, it is in a lot of the smaller areas. Wichita has its own, Wichita Police Department is going to have a completely robust IT department that can generate information all the time. But what do we have? How is it that they'll then interact with KBI? Because that's ultimately the records management for the state. And so these are some of the questions that they've run into some roadblocks. But so it's interesting to hear this, because these are one of the very first things we talked about last fall in the commission. Representative Owens or Finney want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can. This is Representative Owens. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So speaking with legislative post audit, they do not have the capacity to take up that specific audit this year. And so that won't be completed.
Gotcha.
I know that that hinders what we're working on, but unfortunately, they aren't going to be able to do that.
Fair enough. Doesn't make it any less imperative, but good to know.
Yeah, you're right. It's certainly very important, but yeah, they did let me know that was the case.
Okay, I heard it.
Mark, this is Melody Brandon. I think if we're talking about data, one aspect of that has to be accessibility. If you're going to collect it and keep it secret, it's not going to do much good. And so I think one part of that we have to really look at it, making sure that it's transparent, it's consistent, it's meaningful, but also that it's easily accessible to the public and certainly to the public defense.
Mark, this is Mark McCormick, and I wanted to agree with what Melody just said. I think under the heading of accountability and transparency, we ought to have greater access to performance evaluations and those kinds of records, and that there ought to be penalties for not maintaining accurate data as well.
Okay.
Mark, this is John Francis. If I could just speak to that. As I'm listening to everybody talking, first of all, I think I agree with everything that's being said. And as I'm listening, I'm thinking that this kind of distills out into 3 or 4 topics. One is what data needs to be collected. 2 is how is the data collected. 3 is how is it stored and accessed. And I think we need to address all of these. And some parts of this might be more difficult to address in the short run, but I think that doesn't mean that we can't move forward immediately. And kind of as a slight side note, I think many years ago, Senator Haley had proposed legislation to keep data on traffic stops. And I think, I actually don't know what happened with that, but I think expanding that not just to traffic stops, but all stops. But I think really what we need to collect, how it would be collected, and how it would be stored and accessed. I think those are all important aspects of this.
I would like to add something. A few years ago, I was working on civil asset forfeitures. Mark Bennett, you may be familiar with that. And it's taken years but we did come up with a bill like 2 or 3 years ago. And what it did, it set up a database where all of the forfeitures that were happening around the state and different levels of law enforcement, they had to report where they pulled someone over, what it was for, what was the resolution. And that report comes out annually. And so now as of February, you can actually go online and look at that report. And I'm mentioning this because it took a while it took years to get to that point for that data collection, and it's transparent now. So my point is, the way we did it, we ended up going through an audit of the forfeitures that was happening in Kansas. But before that, it took like 3 or 4 years even to get to that point. So the things that we're going to be proposing, it may take baby steps to get there, but that's an illustration of how we can actually get there. It's like, put the proposal out there, maybe get an audit going, and maybe using that forfeiture website with the KBI and the steps that we took to get there as an example.
Okay. Yeah, best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. So, we wish we'd have done this 10 years ago, but we'll get there. It'll be in the future. We'll look back at this time and recognize the steps we're taking now are going to have been beneficial. But I agree that putting this in front of the legislature and telling them, they're going to have to spend a little money here, which may be difficult this next session, but they're going to have to, in order to identify the issues that Professor Francis just, nothing is how it's collected. What is argument? We can argue about what should be collected, but the hard part comes in terms of how it's going to be collected. Even how it's stored isn't going to be, and whether it's transparent. Those are things that can be fairly, can be handled by policymakers. It's how it's going to be collected and the cost associated with it. That becomes the real stumbling block for some of these smaller agencies who they don't have an IT department. They don't have servers. They don't have, so maybe grant funds being made available, things like that. But again, all things to be discussed by the legislature, I think. So all good points. I don't want to give short shrift to data collection, data management, data access to data, that discussion, but unless somebody has something else on
I
that
have one
point.
thing, Chairman Bennett, this is Chief
Yeah.
Ackerman.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're talking about all the data collection and the penalties that some think ought to be for, the records that need to be kept. And I would agree with you, Mr. McCormick, that there should be penalties for not keeping certain records. I really do. And I would think most law enforcement would agree with you on that. The one thing in data collection, I know I would personally like to see, if we're looking for buy-in from law enforcement, which we need to have no matter what, to make this go smooth, I would like to see the data collection on crimes against law enforcement officers, because there's a lot more than people would think against them personally or against their families. Our families get attacked all the time, from either destroying our vehicles and stuff like that. And that I don't think people think about that. And it's not just a white officer. I mean, it's all officers, just because what we do for a job. But I would like to see the data on that as well. I mean, it's a criminal justice race committee, and we're a huge part of the criminal justice system. I think that's something we need to look at as well.
I think that the discussion about collecting data, I mean, I can tell you from being in an office the size of mine, data controls a lot of what we do. And in my ability to, it's been a real benefit to me to have a good, robust records management system so that I can pull out information about any number of topics, whether it's as discrete as how many drivewall suspensions were filed last year to something more global. So I think, again, it's how it's collected. That's the first threshold question, and how it's going to be maintained. And then then we can get into the more granular things about what data is collected, whether it's, but I think that I think having more information is a benefit, no matter whose perspective and who wants to look at that information. I'd rather have more than less, and including the whole panoply of things. So I appreciate your comments. Any other discussion about data?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Sheriff Carr. I know you spoke on it. I am on that subcommittee with Ms. Basinger. I appreciate everybody's input. It's enlightening for myself. We have discussed basically everything that you're all discussing here. There's a lot of hurdles that we're trying to overcome. There are many agencies, rural agencies, that are still operating off of pencil and paper. So we do agree there needs to be a system of some sort. However, how do we build that? And then how do we fund it is a key thing that we're looking at right now. Again, we were hoping to find some funding to support a study. Unfortunately, I don't know where that's going to end up right now. We're in hopes this next session. I think with this panel that's getting put together today, that will be something that you look at in a recommendation to aid us in presenting that to the legislators. I hope Mr. Owens, Ms. Finney can also jump on board and help us. So I just want to say thank you.
Very good.
One thing, Mr. Chairman, that I would agree with Bill Carr on. This Todd Ackerman again. We all once in a while will come across a bad officer, and it comes back to keeping the records again. But if we did have that database, if the legislature could look at it, this is where we try not to pass a bad officer onto somebody else. Nobody wants to have to deal with that because it's very expensive and it makes your department look terrible. But with the proper database, we can tag people like that. And once they're out of the system, they won't be hired anywhere else. And that is very important to us as chiefs and sheriffs as well. Nobody wants a bad person working for us.
Well, insofar as that goes, I'd say that may be a little simpler fix than the data collection of stops, just because that's going to be all over the state. But CPost already exists, and throwing a little money from the legislature at CPost, I think you could address the issues that Mark McCormick raised a moment ago, because agencies are supposed to send stuff to CPost, but the legislature doesn't need to create a new agency, doesn't need to start from scratch there. That place exists, and so that may be a little bit of a subset of data that could be addressed actually sooner rather than later. So good. I'm glad you brought that up, and I think that would speak much more rapidly to the point Mark McCormick was making a moment ago. Okay, I will set this meeting to go till 1:30, and I hate to chew up everybody's lunch hour, but I'm trying to keep that time schedule in mind. We've identified data collection as obviously a big topic. What else? What other things do we, as a subcommittee, think are big ticket issues, something we really need to make sure is addressed. Open it up for discussion.
Chairman Bennett, this is Jean Phillips. So I don't know if I would call this, I think it's big ticket. I don't know if I would call it low hanging, maybe medium hanging fruit. But one of the things that has troubled me, few years ago, Douglas County reached out to the law school for help with first appearances. And one of the things that I found when I talked with Pat, who was then Pat Scalia was the head of bids, is that public defenders cannot get involved until someone has been appointed counsel, and that typically doesn't happen until during the first appearance. I would like to see if there's not a way to investigate or make some changes to the statutes that or regs that Board of Indigent Defense should be appointed before the individual actually has their first appearance, because that impacts bail, and bail reform I think is important. I think we should think about how bail is set, how hard it is to get it reformed. I think there are some programs that are in other jurisdictions where, for example, they do text reminders so that people actually show up for their hearings instead of getting bail revoked. I mean, I think there are programs out there that we could duplicate. And I'm wondering if there's not, to the extent that Representative Finney is looking for sort of like, you know, things we can actually accomplish and recommend to the legislature, that would be something that perhaps we could think about, is getting counsel appointed quicker so they have counsel at first appearances, so they have someone to argue and advocate for that bail, and maybe some small tweaks or changes to the bail system so that, you know, we have text reminders, we have things that get people out so they can keep those jobs and keep moving in society. And I'm wondering if that's not something we'd be interested in.
So I'll start here and say bail reform as the topic. And then you're talking about a couple of more specific things like text reminders and, you know, the infrastructure necessary to do that.
Right.
The second there I would address, we've talked about this locally, so I'm a little bit on, I've had this conversation with our local public defenders about how to get them involved earlier in the first appearance setting. The question has come, do we appoint them up front before, and then suddenly we've created this attorney-client relationship that could lead to a conflict down the road, except that becomes a little bit complicated. Not a reason not to do it, but it's not maybe as easy as that. However, we have discussed, would there be some benefit to the county just having a contract lawyer or two to be
right.
the default appointment for the bail hearing, and then we'll figure out whether you go to the public defender or you hire your own or whatever. So there's always somebody there in that room. So there's a workaround, I think, without implicating ethics and complicating, you know, down the road. But yeah, I don't think that's as heavy a lift as it might seem. The question is money. Does it go back? Are we going to mandate all the counties have to pay somebody, or is the state going to pay into this? That's where it gets more complicated. Melanie, maybe you know, this is right in the middle of your world.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this because yeah, we do manage to do that in the federal system. And I think there are a couple of different models that make it very manageable. One thing that I think we need to look for is the Judiciary's Pretrial Commission report, I think, is coming out, and perhaps Steve Owens could speak to that, but we need to anticipate their report and how we can complement and work with that, because I think that hopefully is going to be one of their recommendations. I think one way to cast this as a big ticket item is access to quality public defense. Whether you're in a rural area, you know, the fact that there's not a public defender office in Wyandotte County or in Liberal or even in Douglas County, I think should be a primary concern. And the lack of accountability or consistency across the entire state of access to public defense, whether it's at first appearance or all the way through the system, is a huge issue. It's a racial issue. It's how the system treats people of color, and it's how we keep a check on police and prosecutorial abuse. So I would hope we can look at that, even if we need to further refine it to make it much more specific for what our recommendations are. That should be part of it. And another issue that I'll throw out there is I think we should look at whether we can reform or recommend reforms of post-prison supervision. What happens to people when they get out of prison, what's expected of them, what sort of resources are they given? Because I think there's a lot of room there for some different ideas and some progressive models that could make a real difference for people of color who have, and how we get them out of the system as opposed to keeping them in the system.
So data management, bail reform as a general topic, public defender.
I'd like to add.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add kind of along the lines of bail reform. Years ago, we had a statute that allowed for OR cash deposit that allowed persons to post bail with the court. If they were convicted, their bail could be applied to their costs and fees. If they were not convicted, that was returned to them. Now we are within this bail bondsman system where I believe bail bondsmen are getting quite wealthy off indigent defendants who are putting up their homes, and they do very little supervision of defendants, but they do collect money in order to bond them out. And then that money doesn't go to the state, it doesn't go to back to the defendant, and there's no supervision. Supervision is happening by court services. Whereas if they had an OR cash deposit and they were to pay their court costs, that goes into the general fund for the state of Kansas. So it's a win-win for everybody except the bail bondsman. But I think it's something that I know we've hoped to get back to for a long time. So that's something I think that should be addressed as part of the bond issue.
Okay. We got text reminders. We got the idea of OR cash deposits. I mean, there's a lot of ways to slice that down to be the more to get to Representative Finney's goal of specificity in terms of recommendations to the legislature. So,
Chairman, this is Representative Owens. If I could chime in real quick, I have been actively involved with the Pretrial Justice Task Force from the Supreme Court. As some of you are aware, Justice Arnoldberger is putting together not only her final report, but then also a best practices model for municipal courts as well as district courts as it relates to pretrial. So I think it certainly warrants this committee looking at those recommendations because they should be released. Last I heard, really pretty quickly, about any time now. We're expecting that final report. So that would be a good report to look at.
Well, that's one other thing too here in this, just pulling back and looking at the politics of this. If a judge in the Court of Appeals is going to issue a report, which we all know is coming, I mean, that's going to have its own wind in its sails getting in the legislature next year. So we might be able to piggyback a bit without having to recreate the wheel here. That's not to say that bail reform we should just leave to her and move on, but simply to say, I don't think we have to carry the whole load ourselves in our commission. I think it's going to already have the attention of the legislature because of her report. So
yeah, and they have spent, I believe, just right at 2 years studying that topic specifically. So yep. Definitely an in-depth topic.
All right. So bail reform, public defender system, and as Ms. Brennan couched it, sort of a reform as to post-incarceration is a very big topic, but that would be a fourth sort of big issue that this subcommittee could at least start with. We'll start there. While we're still in the brainstorming stage here, we have a fifth, sixth, seventh topic that people think is important enough to be a priority.
Mr. Bennett, if you would give me a little.
Dion Gates, good to see you.
Gates. Good to see you as well. Hey, I don't know if this is the right place for it, but I also think that when we have hurting officers, they hurt people. And so my focus would be, or my thought would be that we should, if it hasn't already been discussed, to add something about officer wellness that would be like holistic obviously if we can create new laws, and I think that we should also deal with the big eight, the eight that can't wait. But I think at the end of the day, if you got hurting people, then just putting new laws on the books we're just waiting for another event like what took place to happen again. So it's at the very grassroots, a hard position. And I know it's hard to maybe articulate or to put on paper how we begin to deal with that. But it's my opinion from working law enforcement that it's bigger than just putting new laws on books. I think we need to do both and. So.
Well, I'll jump in and just say, I don't know that we have addressed that specifically, but I can see a avenue. I'll go back to what Mark McCormick said a moment ago. Requiring agencies to inform, I think in Kansas, we could just go straight to C-Post when an officer has done something bad, et cetera, and making sure that that's there so that he doesn't get fired, go to another agency, and that there's some transparency there. There's going to be some HR rules that are going to impact that, but maybe another angle to that is what you're talking about. You know, if there was more of a opportunity, an encouragement in the law to tell agencies when you've got an officer who's burning out, who's, you know, needs time away, but you're worried about the well, your small agency only got 5 guys in the department. You can't afford for one guy to take a month off. What do you do? How does the state help that situation? Or you don't want the stigma associated with the guy needed a month off downtime to get his wits about him. You know, that carries a stigma that, you know, how do we encourage those sorts of things so that you don't have a guy who shouldn't be carrying a gun, pulling people over. He's not in the right frame of mind for it. Yeah, I'll be honest with you, Dan. That's why this kind of a subcommittee is good. No one's said it quite like that before. So, all right. I'm not sure that's a topic anybody's, no, it's not a topic anybody's brought up explicitly, but it's an important topic. Thank you. Anyone want to discuss that?
Chairman Todd Ackerman here. I would agree with Pastor Gates on that. You know, if you look at it, you know, the unfortunate incidents that have happened over the last couple of months, officers, you know, mentally have been taking a pretty good beating as well. There's got to be a release. There's got to be some type of calming for that officer other than putting them right back out on the front line again. Now, granted, we all have different agency sizes to where we're small, we're big, but we all have to do with different types of stresses. Now, we do have employee assistance programs. Problem is, I turn one of mine into an employee public service program. They do not talk to me whatsoever. That is private, but then they have to pay for it. What their insurance doesn't pay for, the officers have to pay for this out of their own pocket. That should be taken care of as part of the mental health rehabilitation, I believe, for an officer. We should not have to pay for our own mental rehab when it's the job causing that. If you can keep a calm person, I don't care if it's law enforcement, firefighter, EMS, whatever, they need that out, you know, that comfort of somewhere. There's no reason to take it out on somebody else. But human nature is that out will come, and we need to control where that's going to. But I would agree with Pastor Gates on that. But I don't believe it ought to come out of the pocket of the first responder, no matter which agency you're with.
Mr. Chairman, this is Chief Cooper. And I agree with everything that's been said. I think that from my perspective, this maybe we take a step back and look at a more holistic approach. I mean, nobody wants bad police officers in law enforcement, and especially good police officers don't want bad police officers in law enforcement. So I think that goes all the way from the hiring practices that we implement, the evaluation, how we discipline misconduct, how that misconduct obviously is recorded and reported to other agencies, all the way down to what Pastor Gates has indicated, and that's the officers' mental and physical health and their readiness to be able to go out on the street and provide proper service to our citizens. So I think it's a holistic approach of getting good officers in law enforcement, maintaining good officers, and weeding out the bad officers.
And let's put it this way: there's nothing but pressure cooker in the criminal justice system. Everybody who works there, whether it's just crime, court service officers, they're wildly understaffed statewide, which impacts the ability to do pretrial services and things like that. Public defender systems underfunded, even the communities that do have public defenders, they don't get paid near enough. And all of those people, prosecutors, there's collateral consequences to doing nothing but dealing with, the worst of human nature over time. Public defender who burns out is not going to be as effective. A prosecutor who burns out is going to be, ineffective. I don't know. I mean, certainly not making excuses of anything, but if we're going to talk about really improving the system, we need to make sure that the people who are involved in it are in a frame of mind to be involved in it, whether it's cops or public defenders or whomever. So this is a tough one to get your arms around because it's a very big topic, sort of an amorphous topic, but I'm glad we had this conversation because it's not something we've really dug into that much as part of the commission just yet. So anyone else want to weigh in on that?
I don't necessarily want to weigh in on this topic,
sure,
but I am wondering to what degree this is racial at all. I mean, it's a viable topic, but I'm not sure it's a racial topic. One of the points that I wanted to make in starting a new tab for you, Mark, is talking about how many people we have in prison. We've actually sent people to other states, to private prisons, because we have so many people in prison. I think part of the reason we have so many people in prison is because of technical probation violations. People who are being locked up for non-criminal behavior. I think we need some sort of legislation to address that.
And Mark, when I was talking about post-prison super reform, I think that kind of plays into that and narrows what I'm talking about. How are we treating people coming out of prison, and are we just trailing them so we can send them back to prison, or are we really giving them the resources to succeed?
The point I've made several times is the state does a pretty good job of giving people chances. We don't do a very good job of giving them the tools to take advantage of the chances. So whether it's pre-incarceration on probation or post-incarceration on parole. And that's no reflection at all on the parole officers or probation officers. I mean, they're the decidedly limited resources they've been handed to try to help these folks has an impact. So fair, all good points.
Mark, this is Jean Phillips. Can I just interrupt for 1 second? I want to piggyback on to what Mark McCormick said about those technical probation violations. And I hope that we will also take a look at how those technical violations are impacting juveniles, especially under the EJJP. We've got people who are going away for a very long time who were convicted as juveniles who, for a very technical, small violation, can end up back in an adult facility for an extended period of time. And I hope that we don't just limit this to adult probation and technical violations, but that we also consider what's happening to the juveniles in our system as well. It'll be handled separate at the legislature, I would assume, because they typically do, but the topic itself, I think, can be right, or all-encompassing. Right. It would need to have separate, I mean, to the extent we are going to advocate for those changes, it would be a change to the juvenile code rather than the adult code. But I think that we need to include that in our evaluation. Understood.
And Mark, this is Jessica Glendenning. If I could piggyback on what Jean Phillips just said, one of my concerns is that I think we need to take a look at the juvenile justice system and how people of color are treated in the juvenile justice system, because there's a lot of data across the country that especially Black youth are policed more than non people of color. And what we see as public defenders a lot of times is we get clients who are people of color who come to us, and this is their first interaction in the adult system, but they have multiple person felonies as a juvenile, which makes them presumptive prison as an adult. And I think there are some concerns that we have about whether those people are being policed more heavily in the juvenile system, whether they're more likely to get convictions, which have a lot lasting impact on them as adults. And again, I think we have maybe some data problems, but that's something that I would suggest we take a look at, because what happens in those juvenile systems impacts people well into their adult years and can have a pretty strong impact on whether or not that person is looking at a probation issue or a prison issue as an adult. So that's something that I would suggest we take a look at.
This is Shannon Portillo. I think along those same lines, it would be important for us to consider SROs, school resource officers, and the ways in which there are data has shown in other states how there are racialized outcomes for students who encounter SROs. And so the ways that we could consider reforms to SRO systems throughout the state, we're thinking through, should we have police officers in schools at all?
This is Representative Finney. I'm not trying to piggyback off of what she was saying, Jessica Glendenning, about youth being policed more. But I think one of the reasons that we are here today is because of the George Floyd incident And if you listen to people that are on the streets, that are protesting, one of the things, the main things that they're saying is that they are being over-policed. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think some of it, goes back to suspended driver's licenses or just being pulled over for some minor traffic violations. And I think it'd be remiss of this organization if we're going to go forward to not even mention some of the reasons that, that we are here today. And we need to at least acknowledge that's why we're here. We may not be able to work on all of those problems, but I think we should summarize by saying, we did meet and we acknowledge, those things that are going on. But we have concluded that maybe these top 3 issues that we're talking about, bail reform or, prison aftercare, I shouldn't say aftercare, but post-prison supervision, these are the ways that we think is best to start dealing with these issues that our society is being affected with. So,
yep, good points. And I would also give credit your subcommittee, Representative Finney, and the subcommittee that Professor Phillips is now part of, or now running. That's one of the topics you guys have addressed is, a lot of this change we're talking about here are things that are going to take some time. They're going to have to take some time to get the funding to do it. Then it'll take time. The example you gave of asset forfeiture, it takes 3 and 4 years sometimes to see the benefit of legislative change. But these are big topic issues. But your committee's talked about the more granular, specific things like addressing the traffic code. That's something that has an impact the day after the law is passed and can impact how often people are pulled over and for what reason and what's the basis to pull people over and that kind of thing. So how quickly someone can get their license back. Because we live in a state without any reasonable access to public transportation. So you don't have a set of wheels unless you live across the street from where you work. You're not working. And your subcommittees, that's an important thing you've taken up as well. So it's 1:17. I don't want to cut us off, but if there's anything else we want to bring up specifically, I want to do that. But to make sure we don't overstay our time here, I wanted to talk about next steps. And I guess the first question is, are people satisfied that this has been a good use of our time, that this is something we want to continue to do?
Yeah, we're about done.
And what's the next step for everybody here? We've identified data collection, bail reform, the public defender system, post-incarceration, the juvenile justice system as well. And then I'll just, in the general sense, more of a reminder than a topic, but what Representative Finney just said, the idea that we want to make sure we don't lose sight of the reason we're here, George Floyd case and the specific concerns that the minority communities, not just African American, but minority communities have raised, that they want to reduce concerns about over policing and too much contact with the criminal justice system in general, however it's done. What's the next steps? I mean, my thought is we set up another time, we move again, but let's, my thought was I would encourage people to come back with some more specific ideas about some of these topics. I'll send out an agenda that gives some guidance here, but people may have a difference of opinion on that. What's the consensus?
Mark, this is Mark McCormick again from the ACLU. I think that's a really good point, but this was a point that I made in one of our previous meetings. One of the greatest commissions to me ever assembled was the Kerner Commission. And really nobody listened to it. And whatever we decide to do, I think we're going to need a parallel campaign educating people about the realities of this system. A lot of what we're talking about today would shock people who don't see what we see from our various vantage points. But they need to know about it because that's where their tax dollars are going. That's where their loved ones are going. So whatever we decide to do, I think we need a parallel campaign educating the public about this. And I think that campaign could help us move other issues along, as Representative Finney was saying earlier, that it takes a long time to get some of this stuff through the legislature, but a public that is more informed on these issues will be more likely to move on them. But as long as they remain, separate issues that belong to folks over there, we're not going to be successful.
Do you have something in mind specifically? I want to unpack that for a second. Do we need a commitment from members of this subcommittee that will, speaking to, or I mean, it's a little hard right now in COVID, but that we would agree that yes, there'll be ACLU puts on an event in Lawrence and in Liberal and in, whatever, and we go and speak, or is it I don't want to.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the ACLU. And the next time we meet, I can talk about what I mean in more depth. Okay. But in the moment that we have, all I'm saying is that whatever we decide to do as a subcommittee, whatever we decide to recommend as a subcommittee, I think in order for that to be effective, there needs to be an education campaign that runs parallel with it.
Yep, I agree with that. Very good. Good point. And that's not something to overlook, because this is all a lot of talk if no one's going to pay attention. Yeah. Other thoughts? Other members of the new members of the subcommittee? Sylvia, Judge Rios, Melody, anyone else who's already been sitting there taking this in? Any other thoughts, things we haven't addressed?
Chairman Bennett, Representative Owens, just a thought real quick. How will things flow from this subcommittee to the main committee for approval? How are those votes going to work? Because while I agree there's going to have to be a huge education piece behind this, there's a process by which, even if this subcommittee agrees to do certain things, it has to be approved by the committee of the Criminal Justice Reform Commission as a whole. And how is that going to flow through as well? So just
I'm sorry. I would expect it to be like we did last December. Each subcommittee is given time I probably wasn't as clear about this. Thanks for bringing that up. The subcommittees are doing their work right now. I don't remember off the top of my head. I want to say September 24th, I think, was the date we came up with to at least give a rough draft of ideas, which gives this subcommittee basically one more meeting to give a rough draft. And I recognize that's tall order, but for reasons I've already said, I still think it's been worth our time. But a rough draft to the commission as a whole, and we can Representative Finney or Professor France or somebody could give that presentation to the overall Criminal Justice Reform Commission. The commission then will talk about any specific recommendations. If there's not something as granular as I want to change law X, Y, or Z, we can still say as a policy matter, the commission endorses the concern, the issue raised by this subcommittee, that subcommittee. The data management subcommittee is not going to have a specific recommendation because they just don't have the information, but we're still, as a commission, I'm very sure, going to say we endorse the overarching goals of that subcommittee. And so that'll be a part of the final report. Now, we're going to meet then in October and in November. And so this subcommittee could, again, even though they're kind of giving it, we'd like to have something in general, a rough draft by September, we could meet again in October and hone in even more and submit that so that the overall commission could discuss it in November. The idea is by the end of the meeting in November, we're going to have our topics, our main issues, things we can agree on, things we don't agree on, but things we believe need to be brought to the attention of the public and the legislature. At that point, I think that speaks to what Mark McCormick said a moment ago. The first round of public information is going to be us, all of us, coming to the legislature, testifying, explaining ourselves, weighing in on pieces of legislation. That's the first public campaign. Then the other is, I think what Mark's going to talk about maybe next time is how do we get this out to the more general public who doesn't pay attention and doesn't watch streaming video from the legislature every day. That answer your question?
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else in the 5 minutes we've got left here want to be heard or address something that we've overlooked?
I got one thing, Chair. We need to appoint a chair. I'd make the motion to have you as continue as the chair of this subcommittee.
Fair enough.
I would second that motion.
Okay. Well, we can do that for the moment. Just to
you weren't getting out alive on this one.
Right. Yeah. I spoke up at the first meeting and said too much, got myself named chair of the whole damn thing. So, yeah. Anyone else want to weigh in on that? Or the other thing too is we can just table that for this meeting. I'll take on the role for the next one and then we see where it goes from there. Thoughts?
This is Representative Finney. Can I nominate a vice chair?
You can.
I nominate Mark McCormick.
Second.
Melody, that was for the record, Melody Brandon, second. Okay. Mr. McCormick, are you willing to serve if called upon?
I don't know if condolences or congratulations are in order.
I'll ask you in 90 days.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I get just a point of order, maybe just a clarification? I have no objection to Mr. McCormick performing that function. But as an ex officio member of the subcommittee, can he be in a vice chair position if he's not a member of the Criminal Justice Reform Commission?
I think we decided that because each subcommittee does not have final authoritative voting power for the commission, then the answer is yes. The subcommittees vote amongst ourselves to refer items to the commission, but only the commission can vote to include something in the final report. So I don't see any reason that Mark couldn't be chair or the vice chair or whatever. So,
Sounds good.
All right. Well, with respect to, I don't know if we're a package deal, I think to be more specific, since we've got those votes, any further discussion? Any other nominations? Seeing none, regrettably, I'm sorry, there was a voice.
Oh, Chairman Bennett, this is Sylvia Penner. I certainly don't have any other nominations. And I just wanted to say that I fully support wholeheartedly the topics that we've identified as the issues that we want to try to address. The only loose end that I might comment on, the question was, well, to go back to what Pastor Gates had mentioned and that Chief Ackerman was supporting, the issue was raised as to whether that really hones in on race. So just to comment on that, there's not a ton of data on it, but I think there is enough evidence that informs us that there is a link between racial bias and excessive force. So to go back to the point raised by Pastor Gates, when you do have law enforcement officers that are dealing with issues, the target of that aggression more times than not is going to be a person of color. So I agree that it's kind of an abstract topic, and how do we give shape to it so that it's something that our subcommittee can address. But I do think that it is something that has a direct tie to race.
This Chief Ackerman, I would agree. That's what I wanted to point out to Mr. McCormick, but I didn't want to debate anybody today, but I would think we need to make sure we don't stay tunnel vision. We need to look at the whole broader picture of why certain things are happening, not just that it happened. And that was my whole point. I thank you for that, Sylvia.
Yeah. Well, I think if we make the assumption that when all too often when somebody's wearing a badge and a gun who maybe shouldn't be, somebody's, for whatever reason, we unpack all the many multitude of reasons why someone shouldn't be, that all too often the people who suffer are going to be folks of color in the community, then anything we can do to reduce that opportunity and get those folks out of the force and onto some other profession where they're not in that position, or even giving them a break if they need it, probably benefits them. But everybody's made a good point, and I understood Mark's comment earlier as well. So, well, back to the matter at hand. That I don't want to. We're down to about a minute or so left here, in terms of, for the moment at least, having myself remain as the person running these meetings, and having Mark as Mr. McCormick as the vice chair, at least for the interim. We'll break that down. All in favor of Chief Ackerman's nomination of me as the continuing chair of this commission? All in favor? I guess, Jordan, are you still on?
Yes.
Okay. Would you do the roll call at this point for everybody on the? I think we're supposed to do a roll call vote anytime we vote on something. We'll do that now, and then we'll move to Mr. McCormick, the vote for him as well. I guess we could do them as one, but I'd rather do them one at a time. So if you would, I'll abstain as to my vote. I'll lead us off.
Sure, and I'm just going to read across my screen here rather than go in order, if that's okay.
That'll work.
Chief Ackerman,
Aye.
Professor Phillips,
Aye.
Pastor Gates,
Aye.
Chief Hooper,
Aye.
Professor Francis,
Aye.
Jessica Glendenning,
Aye.
Mark McCormick,
Aye.
Senator Wilborn,
Sorry, aye.
Representative Owens,
Aye.
Melody Brannon,
Aye.
Judge Rios,
Aye.
see Sheriff Presley,
Aye.
Tabitha Owen,
Aye.
Representative Finney,
Aye.
Sheriff Carr,
Aye.
Sylvia Pinner,
Aye.
and Margie Phelps.
Aye.
And I believe I've got everyone. If there's someone I missed, please let me know, and then your vote. And then I also have a yes vote from Shannon Portillo.
Okay. Let's quickly move on then to the vote for Vice Chair Mr. McCormick. My vote is
Chief Ackerman,
Aye.
Professor Phillips,
Aye.
Pastor Gates,
Aye.
Chief Hooper,
Aye.
Professor Francis,
Aye.
Jessica Glendenning,
Aye.
Mark McCormick,
Can I abstain from my own vote?
Sure.
Oh, sorry, didn't process that. Senator Wilborn,
Aye.
Representative Owens,
Aye.
Melody Brannon,
Aye.
Judge Rios,
Aye.
Mark's already voted. Sheriff Presley,
Aye.
Tabitha Owen,
Aye.
Representative Finney,
Aye.
Sheriff Carr,
Aye.
Sylvia Pinner,
Aye.
Margie Phelps.
Aye.
okay. Well, very good. I hope everybody feels their time was well spent today for a first meeting. Seems like we very quickly got off to a good start in terms of identifying topics of mutual, well, that we all agree are important. So next thing we'll do is try to put an agenda together where we can unpack some of these things again. In an invitation for the next month's meeting through Jordan. You'll be getting that, and I'll try to make note too of everybody who listed someone else who wanted to be a part of this, to make sure that everybody who's expressed an interest or been identified as a potential subcommittee member gets invited to the next meeting, and we will go from there. Any final thoughts or comments from anyone? Okay, folks, thank you very much for your time. We'll go ahead and draw the meeting to a close, and we'll be in touch. It's been a interesting conversation, and I appreciate everybody's candor and willingness to take part. I think it'll be a good thing for the state. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.